Welcome to the Reborn Podcast, where we dive deep into personal and spiritual growth, entrepreneurship, and leadership. I am Tony Beatrice, a 20-year-old entrepreneur, author in the making, and most importantly, a follower of Christ. On this podcast, we tackle how to transform your life and business through faith and personal development. Each week is a journey of its own, and today's episode is no different. Today, we're talking about something that I've learned firsthand in both life and business, and that's the power of grace. Grace has been one of the most important lessons God has taught me, and I believe it's a key to growing in your business, your personal life, and your relationship with Christ. If you're driving or out on a run, stick with me, because this episode is going to challenge you and going to challenge how you see grace and how you apply it in your everyday life. Let me start by sharing a lesson that transformed how I approach life and business. I used to be that guy running in circles, frustrated, and feeling like I was hitting dead ends. In 2023, I came to Christ, and since then, things have changed a lot. I used to be emotionally, mentally, and physically unhealthy. I had no relationship with Christ, no real relationship, and I tried to make it all on my own. My business was struggling. My health was tanking, and I was running myself into the ground. But God had other plans. He brought me into a relationship with Him, and in that, I realized something crucial. If I wanted to grow, if I wanted to find success, and if I wanted to live a fulfilling life, I needed to learn how to give grace. It was the missing piece of the puzzle. You see, in Ephesians 2:8-9, it says, For it is by grace you have been saved, through faith. And it is not from yourselves, it is a gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast. Grace isn't earned, it's freely given by God, and we are called to give it to others. We cannot perform to earn God's grace, God's favor, God's mercy. It's not something that we can ever earn. We are inherently deserving of eternal damnation. But God sent His Son to die for us. And so instead of looking at us as imperfect sinners, He looks at His Son who lived a perfect life and died on a cross for our sins. So how does this apply to business? Well, when I first started in sales, it was a brutal grind, 100% commission, zero base salary, and no safety net. I was stressed, anxious, and honestly, I had no peace. It wasn't until I realized that grace wasn't just something for church on Sundays, but something I needed to carry into my business that things started to change. I began to give myself grace when things didn't go as planned. Grace to my clients who are still figuring things out, and even grace to those around me who maybe didn't understand the entrepreneurial journey I was on. And you know what happened? My business started to thrive. Not because I was working harder, but because I was working from a place of peace and confidence in God's grace. Now, I know some of you are thinking, Tony, that sounds wonderful, but how do I actually apply this? I get it. Sometimes the idea of grace can feel abstract, but let me break it down with a few practical lessons. Number one, give grace to yourself as a leader. In the book, Developing the Leader Within You, John Maxwell talks about the importance of leading yourself before you can lead others. That resonated with me because I realized I was my own harshest critic. I kept pushing, hustling, and grinding, but I never gave myself room to breathe. It wasn't until I allowed myself to mess up and learn that I saw real growth. Grace starts with you. Number two, give grace to your clients and customers. As entrepreneurs, we want things to move fast. We want results. But guess what? Not everyone is going to be ready on your timeline. When I started giving my clients space to grow at their own pace, my relationships with them deepened, and in turn, they trusted me more. The same way God gives us a space to come to Him at our own pace, we should extend that same grace to those who we serve. One of my favorite things I talk about with God is he is an almighty, all-knowing, all-loving God, but he is very, very friendly. He doesn't go into your dining room and say, "Hey, yeah, you're gonna have to, accept me as your Lord and Savior, or yeah, you're just gonna be uh, given eternal damnation." Instead, he knocks, he knocks, he knocks, he knocks, and you have to let him in. And when you let him in, your life will change. There's this phrase I really like to use, and it's faith isn't just a Sunday thing. It's an everyday thing. And I live by that. As a leader in business and in life, grace doesn't just show up in my relationships with clients and coworkers. It also shows up in my relationships with God. Every day I drive forward, whether I'm speaking, writing my book, or building my personal brand, is fueled by the grace God gives me to keep going. Take the story of when I shut down my first business, because it's very, very recent. It was a hard decision, but I felt God calling me to something bigger. It's easy to see failure as the end, but through grace, God showed me it was just a redirection. Proverbs 3:5-6 tells us, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways, submit to him, and he will make your paths straight. Trusting God's grace has allowed me to pivot and pursue a calling I never thought possible. One of the most important things to touch on here is, I think, simple obedience. One of the things I pray for on a recurring basis is simple obedience, which to me I define as, Lord, I may not always understand your will. It might not make any sense to me, Lord, but open my heart, soften my heart, and give me the desire to align my will with your will, and your will be done, because I know your will is so much greater than my own. Simple obedience is following his will rather than our own. We often think that I want to be a billionaire, and so that's going to be God's will for my life, but maybe it's not. Maybe God's calling you to launch a church. Maybe God's calling you to work a regular W-2. Maybe God is calling you to something different. And it's not that we need to doubt in him. It's that we need to align our will with his and follow his will. This brings me to servant leadership. My approach to business now revolves around the idea of serving others with grace. I don't just lead for the sake of leading. I lead to serve my clients, my team, and my community. It's a shift in mindset, and it's something I encourage all of you to think about in your own life. Jesus exemplified servant leadership, and as a business owner, it's something I strive to model. Matthew 20:28 says, just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. Let me read that over you again. Matthew 20:28 says, just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. The Bible also tells us that he who wants to be first must be last. I was talking to a brother of mine who is a Christian rock star. He's an amazing young dude, 19 years old, and just killing it for Jesus. He's a lead singer at a young adult group that has probably at least 100 people, and he's just such an amazing soul. And I told him, if you started writing your songs, if you wanted to, you can make it huge. And his response to me was, if you want to be first, you must be last. I'm going to pull up his text to me real quick, and I'll read this over you. Okay. So what he said was, I said, you should start writing your own songs, bro. You could make it big if you wanted to. And he said, I probably could, but the greatest must become a servant. So my calling is to love God and love my neighbor as myself. If he has that for me in the future, it's all by his great grace. That is simple obedience. This is someone who could easily go viral, make a ton of money, and make a big impact too. It's not just that it's a worldly thing. It could be a really big impact, but he's impacting the world in the way he feels God is calling him to, which right now is serving on a worship team versus starting his own team, his own ministry, his own writing his own songs, etc. So, as entrepreneurs, we often get caught up in the hustle and in pursuing success. But here's the catch. True success comes from how we serve others, how we lead with grace. All right. It is time for a little bit of Q&A. I often get questions from our community about how grace plays out practically in everyday life. So I'm going to answer a couple of those today. Tony, how do you balance grace and accountability in business? That's a great question. Grace and accountability aren't opposites. They actually complement each other. Grace means understanding that mistakes will happen, but accountability ensures we learn from them and grow. You can hold your team and yourself to a high standard while still allowing room for growth and learning. Question 2 is, how do I show grace to myself when I feel like I'm not achieving my goals fast enough? Listen, I've been there. And quite frankly, if you are an entrepreneur, a pastor, anyone in leadership, anyone who has some sort of goal, if you have a goal, this is just a human innate feeling. Sometimes we are our own worst critics. And I think it's very, very common for us to feel like we're not achieving our goals fast enough. But Philippians 1:6 reminds us, being confident of this, that he who began a good work in you will carry it on to completion until the day of Christ Jesus. God's timing is perfect. Remember that his timing will not always align with the timing we desire. Trust that the work he's doing in you is right on track. Before we wrap up, I want to leave you with this. Grace isn't just something you receive, it's something you give. It transforms your business, your relationships, and your walk with Christ. So as you go about your week, ask yourself, where can I extend grace today? To yourself, your team, your clients, or maybe a loved one. If today's episode resonated with you, share it with someone who you think would benefit from this message. And don't forget to join our free community, because growth happens better when we do it together. Head over to our school community. I will link it in the description below, and become a part of our movement focused on spiritual and personal growth. I'm Tony Boutros, and this has been the Reborn Podcast. Until next time, keep growing, keep leading, and keep living with grace.